Well, hello everybody. I'm Roger Kirby, and I have the privilege and the pleasure to be the president of the Royal Society of Medicine. And I hope you know that over the last 2 years we've been doing In Conversation Live. The idea really came from my work as a consultant at Barts about more than 20 years ago, where I worked with Professor Anthony Clare. And I used to love his radio programs
in the psychiatrist chair. Wonderful.
And he was just a wonderful person, and I love those programs. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to do something similar, especially as my predecessor was Sir Simon Wesley, a psychiatrist. I'm just a humble urologist, but I must say I've loved doing these programs. So tonight, rather than doing them on Zoom, we are in the Royal Society of Medicine doing it live, and this evening I'm very delighted to introduce to you Angela Rippon, probably one of Britain's most famous broadcasters over so many years, and certainly the first female newscaster, journalist, author, just amazing person. So let's start, Angela. I think everybody would be really interested to hear your background. How did you get into this business and in the first place?
I was invited, which doesn't happen very often these days, I have to tell you, because the competition to get into broadcasting is very intense. But I had decided that I wanted to be a photojournalist because I loved writing, and my father had given me a camera when I was 6 years old, and I started taking pictures then. I've been taking them ever since. So being a photojournalist to me was the perfect job. So I applied for a job on the local newspaper, which I got, because in those days, if you wanted to be a journalist, you didn't go to university and do media studies. You actually did a 3-year apprenticeship on a newspaper as a journalist, during which time you took a degree, which was a combined degree that took in politics. You had to know everything that worked from parish councils all the way up to the United Nations. You had to do a sort of law degree, because you had to know about slander and libel. Newspaper practice, in those days we didn't have the computers we've got now. Everything was done with hot metal and the press is rolling. You had to know how the newspaper was produced. And in that 3-year apprenticeship, you also had to learn how to do shorthand, because we didn't have the little microphones and recorders that we've all got now, and typing, which means I can still type faster than anybody else in my office, because you had to learn how to touch type. So I did a 3-year apprenticeship, and before that, I did a 2-year apprenticeship in photography. So I did a total of 5 years, and was taking my own photographs, writing my own stories, getting my byline in the local newspaper. And the local television executive producer rang me one day and said he liked the sort of things I was writing. Would I be interested to go and see him and possibly do some work for the BBC in Plymouth? So I went, I did an audition, and they offered me a job. And I was 6 months from finishing my, as it turned out, 5-year apprenticeship. And so I worked on my day off on the television. I knew how to write stories, obviously I knew how to interview people, but actually appearing on the television screen live in front of a camera and being a broadcaster was something that I had to acquire. And at the end of the 6 months, when I was working still for the newspaper, when I got all my indentures and everything else to say I was now a qualified photojournalist, they said, would you like to come and work for us full time? And I remember at the time thinking, well, if I'm rubbish at this, it doesn't matter, because I know how to take pictures and write stories. I'll just go off and be a photojournalist, which is what I wanted to be in the first place. But of course, television in its way is the ultimate in photojournalism. It's pictures, it's writing, it's talking to people. And that's why for many years I've also been a director. So because I still like taking pictures, and I still get behind the camera from time to time. But, so that was how I got into the business.
And did you at the beginning, did you feel that this is what you wanted to do in front of a camera? Or no training, you must have been rather nervous in the beginning.
Well, I kind of was, but I'd belonged to the local amateur dramatic society for a long time. While I was, in fact, when I was in the sixth form, I was in the society. And when I was on the newspaper, I was appearing in plays. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to use I knew how to communicate with people, and I think the skill of broadcasting is being a communicator. And so I suppose I wedded what I knew as a journalist to what I had learnt by appearing in plays live, and tried to bring the two together. And actually, I loved it. I took to it like a duck to water. I enjoyed being in front of the camera, except that on my very, very, very first broadcast back in 1966, September the 5th, 1966, and I know that because I kept the contract. Don't ask me why, but I kept my BBC contract. There it is. On the 5th of September, 1966, I was paid the grand sum of £6.10 for appearing on the telly. They pay me a bit more now, but not a lot. But I did my very first broadcast. I've actually still got the script that I read, and it was a story I was sent to do about oyster beds that were being established in the River Tamar, which is the border between Devon and Cornwall. And I did the story. I went with a cameraman and we filmed it. And when I got home that night, I said to my dad, Daddy, what was that like? He said it was all right. He said, I found that very interesting. He said, the only thing is you look like a rabbit caught in the headlights. And I said, but Daddy, I'm a journalist. I write on a newspaper. I'm relatively anonymous. People may know my name, but they don't know my face. And suddenly I was working in front of, I don't know how many thousands of people in the West Country, live on television. My father had been a Royal Marine. He was an engineer. And my dad, who had no background in broadcasting at all, he said, well, the next time you go in, when you look at the camera there, he said, talk to me. Pretend I'm the camera. Just tell me the story. And I'm a visiting professor of journalism at Lincoln University, and I tell all my students in the first week, I've spent 55 years now talking to my dad, because that's what I do. And when you think about it, those of you who remember lovely Terry Wogan on Radio 2, always used to refer to listener in the singular. Because, there may be, I don't know how many of you there are here live in this studio, but, and I do things live. I've done things live in front of more than 3,500 people in an arena, more than that in others. But you normally, when you're watching or listening at home, there's one or maybe two of you sitting. I'm not talking to 100,000 people or 10 million people at one time. I'm talking to individuals. And my dad just got it right. You talk to me, he said. And that's what I do.
It's really interesting that, because doctors at the moment are having to undergo a complete change in the way we communicate. We used to be patient to patient across the table. Mm-hmm. Suddenly we're communicating with our patients on Zoom, and we're doing everything on computers. So instead of being, and the way we teach now, instead of being at a lectern with PowerPoint slides, we have to do interactive meetings around a table. So we're having to learn to be a bit like journalists, actually. I think a lot of young people watch these programs that we put on in conversation. So I think it's an important learning point for those kids to look at the camera, speak to one person. Your dad got it right.
Just talk to one person, because it's one or maybe two people at home. I don't know, you guys, when you're watching television at home, how many of you are sitting around watching the telly together? But it probably is not more than two people these days, because the kids are probably upstairs watching Netflix or something. They're not necessarily in the same room with you. And not only my dad, but also Terry Wogan got it right. There's an old Jewish saying, isn't there, from my lips to God's ear, and that's what radio is. Radio, I listen to radio on my own, and I'm a huge fan of Radio 4 and Radio 4 Extra. Whoever is broadcasting, they're talking to me. They're not talking to 15 million people. They're talking to me, and I think. The word broadcasting covers the fact that we are broadcasters. That is what we do. But the skill of what we do is being communicators, communicating what we're talking about so that people find it, as Lord Reith wanted broadcasting to be, which was entertaining and informative, that where people not only feel that you are talking to them, but what you are telling them is not in a school mistressy or school masterly way. You are talking to them individually so that they feel you really are communicating with them the joy of the story, the seriousness of the story, the atmosphere of the location in which you find yourself. I always feel when I'm doing interviews particularly, but any of the work that I do, I'm a conduit between me and the person to whom I'm speaking, or me and the situation in which I find myself. And it's my role as a broadcaster, as a communicator, to be able to share that experience, whether it's the experience of being in a place, in a situation, or talking to an individual, with the people at the other end of the camera or the other end of the microphone who are sharing that with me. Mm-hmm. And that is the art of communication. And then I think for doctors, it's got to be the same. You are, again, talking one-to-one. You have to make, I think all the great communicators in the world are the people who make the individual to whom they're speaking feel the most important person in the world. And it is that skill of being a communicator and not just sort of, dribbling out what it says in the book, or what it's told you that you're supposed to say, or you like the people who are telesales people who work from scripts. It's not. It's got to come from here. It's got to come from here, and you've got to be, I suppose, you've got to hope that the brain is in gear with the mouth, so that what comes out is actually something that people are going to want to hear. But you are not just broadcasting, you are communicating.
And just picking up on what you said about scripts there, because you became famous originally as a newsreader, which is, I think you said, I wanted to do more than be an automated auto cue reader. Mm. I wanted to be the now link. And you must have been one of the first people to be a link person within broadcasting, were you?
Well, that's because, of course, I didn't start as a newsreader. I started as with my journalistic background. I started as a journalist on television. I was a reporter in BBC Plymouth. I was reporting on stories. I was interviewing people. When I went to Westwood Television from there in the West Country, that was at that time the ITV regional series. Again, I was a reporter, but I became a director. I was making documentaries. I was editor of women and children's programs. I was producing stuff on air, not just for myself, but for other people on the station. So I was physically involved in making programs, particularly as a director, which is the ultimate in photojournalism. When you get an idea and you can see its potential for something that will be entertaining and informative, that you desperately want to make and that you hope people are going to want to watch, and going out and filming it with my crew and directing the camera and doing all the research, putting it together, editing it, doing all of that. I was doing that for years before. One day I saw an advertisement in Broadcast magazine, which is the sort of trade magazine of my industry, which said there was a vacancy for a reporter at Television News. And I thought, that sounds interesting. And I applied for it and got the job. And I remember all of my friends in the West Country saying, you're a director, you're a producer, you're an executive producer, you're a presenter. Why do you just want to go and be a reporter? Because it was different and it was a challenge. And I went to Television News as a reporter and did what everybody else in the reporting pool did. I did all big international stories, major national stories. During the oil crisis, back in the 70s, I was going backwards and forwards to Scandinavia regularly because they were the people that were still supplying us with oil when in the Middle East they weren't. I interviewed Sheikh Yamani, who was the Middle Eastern oil minister. I was doing all of that. I was doing my time in Northern Ireland. It was the height of the troubles in Northern Ireland, and all of the reporters were doing we would go for 10 days every 6 weeks on a rotation. So I was doing all of that before one day Richard Baker decided he'd take a holiday, and they suddenly found themselves short of a newsreader. And the news editor said to me, "Here, Angie," said, "you used to, you can do stuff in the studio, can't you?" I said, "Yeah." "All right, do you mind sitting in and doing the 9 o'clock news?" As simple as that. So it was not that, I went and became a newsreader immediately. Didn't want to be. I wanted to do what I was previously doing, hands-on, proper television. News reading, I said, yeah, I'll do that for, while Richard's on holiday, and then it became a job.
and I think a lot of people who would like to be broadcasters would get terrified that they can't think of what to say. Did you ever have a moment where you had a brain freeze and you couldn't think of anything to say? Very, very early on in my career at Westwood Television, when every week I did a live women's programme that ran for an hour, and I still to this day don't know what happened, but the titles came up,
The floor manager gave me a cue, and my mind, because we didn't have auto cue or anything like that, my mind went completely blank. And I've always said that if someone had asked me my name in that moment, I don't think I could have told them what it was. But something sort of kicks in, and it felt like a lifetime, but it was probably only about 5 seconds. But actually, when you think about it, 5 seconds is quite a long time. Just think for a second, just it goes 1. That's 5 seconds. And my brain froze for that. And everything just kicked in. And then the program was an hour long, so I had 59 minutes and 30 seconds to get over it. And hopefully I've never done it
That's
since.
the only time that ever happened.
As far as I know, that's the only time I've ever done it.
But when you're doing something like one of the royal weddings or the Diana's funeral, for example, I mean, you had hundreds of millions of people probably watching.
Yes, yes.
Do you ever get nervous at all, or do you just know you can do it?
All of you are doctors, all of you are skilled, or most of you in the room are skilled in some form of medicine. You know what you're doing. You learn. It's your trade. You are experts at it. When you go into an operating theatre, or when you're faced with a patient and you have to do a diagnosis or whatever, do you get nervous? Do you worry? No, you go in and you know you can do it. And I've now been doing this job since 1966, which I think is something like 55 years. And if I haven't learned how to do the job in that time, I shouldn't be doing it, frankly. And in the very early days, I just took confidence from the fact, and over the years, I've learned how to do my job. And so I think, yes, you do get nervous. There's never a moment. I think the day you say you aren't anxious about doing something, then you should probably give up doing it, because then you become a bit too blasé, and that's when you are going to fall flat on your face and prat face on it. But I do sometimes get very nervous when it's a major, major job. Not that I don't think I can do it, but that I might let down the production, the team, that I'm going to look stupid. I have to tell you, ego is a great self-preservative. The last thing you want to do in public in front of 10 million or 3 million people or whatever is look an idiot. And that actually keeps you going. And I suppose over the years you learn how to say, yes, I am a bit nervous about something, but look, I haven't got time for that now because I've actually got a television program to do. So, nervousness, just get over there and I'll think about you later on. It's that kind of thing. And I have to have confidence to know that I do that I can do what I can do. I have to have that, because otherwise, I do live television. And in live television, it's what I said before. Your brain has to be in gear with your mouth. You have to have confidence in what you're doing. And yes, I've done major, major outside broadcasts, and I suppose the most major of them are the big royal events that I've done. And the answer is you do your research. You don't just rock up on the day, open your mouth and hope that the right words will come out. Before I was the host on Charles and Di's wedding, which meant that I actually anchored the whole program from the studio. I was doing lots of films leading up to it. I did the interview with the pair of them 2 nights before the wedding. You make your brain work as your filing cabinet. And you just have to do so much research and think of all the things that you are likely to need to know on the day. Being in the studio was slightly different from actually being out and doing live commentary on an outside broadcast. So when, for instance, I did Princess Diana's funeral for Bloomberg television, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of people were watching, because that went worldwide. I mean, it went literally around the world. When I did the wedding of Meghan, before that I did Catherine and William. I did their wedding for American television. Meghan and Harry's wedding I did for Australian television. I did Diana's funeral, as I say, for Bloomberg. I did Prince Philip's funeral for Australian television. What you do is you spend hours with the material, first of all, that the palace provides you with, that gives you all the background on who is involved, what their job is, all sorts of other stuff. You do as much research as you possibly can, because once you are in a live situation, you can't suddenly get up and rush off and say, I better go and check that and see what it says in the archive or in the research notes. You've got to have it up here. And so, and in addition to that, what I do on those big occasions, I have small cards which have sort of subject headings on them, so just reminding me of a few facts and figures that I'm possibly going to need. But basically, you fill your head with, 30,000 facts, figures, bits of information, because you don't know which 100 you're actually going to need. I remember when I was doing the wedding for ABC, and I did Charles and Camilla's wedding, that's right, for the BBC in America. But they sent over a whole team from ABC America, including their sort of blonde bombshell anchor woman who had nothing going on between the ears at all, but about $40,000 worth of dental work, so she looked lovely on the screen. But she was so overcome, I think, with, oh my God, I'm in Britain. You know, she was in London and it's royal, and she was doing the wedding, and everybody that was coming in and out. And she couldn't get over the fact, those of you that might remember the wedding of the two of them, they didn't have very many sort of famous people. Elton John was there, and a couple of other people. But on the whole, it was their friends and family and so on. And so she was a bit put out by that. But she clearly hadn't done any research on it. And there was a moment when when Kate and William came back from the ceremony and were going into Buckingham Palace, and she got her train caught a bit on the back of the carriage. And this girl stopped talking because she didn't know what to say. And I was able to say, well, and I can't remember the names right off the top of my head at the moment, I was able to say whoever the carriage man was and his son were the two people that were there, because they were the ones who look after the royal carriages, and they had cleaned them to within an inch of their lives, and they looked after the horses and so on. So I was able to sort of pick up and talk about that and say, I should think that Bert Bloggins, or whatever he was called, was a bit worried about this. I hope she's not going to scratch the paintwork with that or whatever. But she had done no research at all. So you never know which bits you need, and that's the skill. It all goes up there so that at the right time, hopefully, you'll say the right words.
Well, that's something that you've had a lot of time to prepare for. What happens when you get something totally out of the blue? We were talking about Gorbachev.
Oh, yes.
Out of the blue.
1991,
yes.
August the 19th, when I was working at the time. I had my own program on radio, LBC Radio, and it was just called Breakfast with Angela Rippon, which I did for, I think, about 2 years. And it was on from 6 o'clock until 9 o'clock live, Monday till Friday, which means I used to get up at about 3:30 in the morning, shower, get ready to work, be in the office just after 4, do research right up until 6 o'clock on what we were going to be doing that day. And on this particular day in 1991, I would always listen to the World Service before that was what I had on the radio. And at about, about 4 o'clock-ish, I think, or 4:15, on the World Service, they said, we're getting unconfirmed reports of a coup d'etat in Russia, where Gorbachev at the time was president and Yeltsin was sort of in the wings waiting he had a very high position in the Politburo at the time. And I got on the phone immediately to my producer and said, did you hear what I just heard? And he said, yes. So I said, we've got to get in the studio right now. Because at LBC at that time, the chain of command, I was one of the executive producers as well as the presenter, and he was executive producer. And the chain of command on what we did in the program went from him to me to him. It was that short. So we could make a decision. And we got into the studio, I suppose, by about 4:30. We were on the telephone then to all of our contacts at Izvestia, at Pravda, at all the Russian contacts that we had, saying, what the heck is going on? Can we confirm this? Yes, they said. And I remember they gave us the name of somebody who lived opposite the Russian White House, and he spoke English. He was a professor at the university, so we rang him and he was telling us, I can see the tanks outside and I can see what's happening. So we were getting all of these names and telephone numbers, and then we were ringing America to get hold of all the people who were on who were in Congress and in the Senate, because it was sort of late in the evening there. And then at 5 o'clock, we started hitting the phone to all of our top contacts in our books for the British Cabinet, for the Foreign Office, all of them. And we went on the air at 6 o'clock and actually broke the story. Well, we were so busy setting up all of these people. There's no time to run off and start doing research thinking, what is this going to mean for Russian politics? What is this going to mean for geopolitics? How is this going to affect what's happening in America, et cetera, et cetera? because when you are doing a daily program like that and you're working in news and current affairs, again, reading the papers all the time, absorbing the material, it means that I went on air at 6 o'clock for the program that was going to last for 3 hours with no script. I just had what I knew I wanted to say, and the brain was in gear with the mouth, and I had a list of people that I was going to be talking to, because my producer was then sat in the gallery with our engineer making the phone calls to whoever, and it was coming up on a screen, and we went from one interview to another, and it was a question of saying the right words at the right time, asking the right questions that were pertinent of whoever was on the other end of the line. And if you are steeped in news and current affairs, as I had to be at that time, that is being a proper broadcast. It's probably one of the things I did that only people in London who were listening on that particular morning to LBC would know what I was doing. I mean, we won so many awards for it. It was absolutely fantastic. But it's one of the things of which I'm most proud, because to me, that's proper broadcasting. That is sitting down, gauging the situation, knowing who to talk to, knowing the questions, getting the answers, and even more satisfying knowing that at the BBC on Radio 4, which didn't go on the air until 6:30 in those days, they have not such a short line of communication. They had to work out whether or not they thought it was true. They were listening to us, and they didn't break the story until 7 o'clock. And then they were talking to my researchers, saying, where did you get that person in Moscow? Can you give us a telephone number? We had Sky News, ITV, and the BBC following what we were doing on LBC on that programme in the morning, which was really satisfying. And then when we scooped some international awards for the programme afterwards, that was even more so. But that's proper broadcasting. That's brilliant. I tell you a funny thing. When I finished at 9 o'clock in those days, Michael Parkinson used to take over from 9 until 12. And Parky, I remember, was standing in the gallery with a big grin on his face, because he knew I'd done the foundation work, and then he was going to come in and pick it up. And I remember saying in one of the commercial breaks, it's a commercial radio station, saying to him, push off, Parky, this is my story. And he just sat there and he said, no, I'm coming in at 9. And he did.
Good old Michael. Well, you never know, President Putin might suffer the same fate. Fingers crossed. It'd be a good job you could report on that. And
if only.
But listen, one of the people say about you, forever young. Those are the two words that I've heard referring to you. And I know you're interested in helping people age. And I think there are one or two people who've aged very well themselves in the audience. But do you have any tips for us? How do we age better?
Well, I made a series with Chris Van Tulloken called How to Stay Young. We did 6 programs on it. And in one of the programs, and I'm going to show you a clip in a minute, in one of the programs I went to Germany, where, and some of you may know that I studied classical ballet until I was 17. And so I love dance. And I was fascinated to see this particular piece of research that they were doing in Germany at the time with the help of an Italian professor who is based in Britain, but so it was really multinational. But they had decided to do an experiment to see what would happen if they got a group of people who were 60 plus up to 90. One group of them dancing and one group of them doing exercises in a gymnasium. And well, shall we have a look at the clip? Yeah. Because this is the clip from the program that we did, and the findings were absolutely fascinating.
Over to you, Ben. Can you share that? Angela's going to lead it for us.
But it's true, you see, because when you think about it, dancing it's aerobic. It builds strength in your muscles. It helps your core. It helps your balance. It helps your flexibility. And it keeps this working, the brain, because you have to remember the steps and what to do. Yeah. So it is a total body exercise I promote it as much as I possibly can.
The opposite of the gym, where you're just mindlessly pedaling or
one or two,
doing weights.
As he says, one or two groups of muscles, yes.
So another area of interest of yours is antibiotic resistance, and I think all the doctors in the room will know that we have more and more problem with antibiotic resistance, partly because the farmers give antibiotics to their animals, but also maybe doctors overprescribe antibiotics. I know as a surgeon I've been guilty of that. We used to give prophylactic antibiotics before all our my prostate patients. I was so worried that they would get an infection. I think I definitely overused. What are your thoughts about antibiotic resistance?
Well, I mean, it's a matter of fact. We do. Those little so-and-sos, those little bacteria, they are very, very clever. And some brilliant filming was done in, I think, Cambridge, where they demonstrated that by laying down on a surface a series of antibiotics from the strength that you would give to a human to one that was 10 times stronger to one that was 100 times stronger. They then introduced bacteria into these sort of groups of antibiotics, and over, I think it was 10 days it took for the bacteria introduced at this end to the antibiotics that you would give to human beings, for them to work their way through and discover how they could resist the antibiotic, and the bacteria that managed to get through each of the barriers to the next level then multiplied, and it took 10 days, it was either 10 or 12 days, it was a while ago I did it, and I can't quite remember, 10 or 12 days, for the bacteria to completely swamp all of the antibiotic, even up to the antibiotic, which is 100 times stronger than you would ever give to a human being. And that's because there is resistance. These little so-and-sos have worked out how to resist the antibiotic. And that is what's happening in human beings. And there are now too many individuals who find that antibiotics don't work on them anymore, too many bacteria that they don't work on anymore. So we need to find, we need to find stronger or new bacteria, new antibiotics that the bacteria have never come across before. You know, they come across it and they think, oh, well, we know what that is, we know how to deal with that. And so that's it. So I went to Texas to see a professor who, as a young man, he used to go fishing with his grandfather in the bayous in Texas, and he noticed that they were full of alligators. And of course the swamps and the bayous there are full of bacteria. They are bacteria soup. And he would notice that these alligators, like crocodiles, which live till they're 70, 80, 90 years old, he would see them very often with a leg missing or a chunk out of them. And as he became a doctor, he couldn't understand how the alligators didn't die from bacterial infection. And he's decided that there must be something in the blood of alligators that is a natural antibiotic. And he's working with a pharmaceutical company to see if he can extract and define what that something is so that they can turn it into a new breed of antibiotic that the bacteria have never come across before. And he goes out at night capturing alligators, takes blood from them, and then works with it in the laboratory. And this is just a little bit of the film that we made when we went alligator hunting.
Such an exciting life. Great clip. It must have been fun being on that boat with those alligators.
Oh, it was, yes. But you see, that's the lovely thing about my job. When I worked on the holiday program, for instance, I got to do all sorts of lovely things. Like we went up to the Arctic Circle, north of one of the big fjords in Finland, and we went diving with killer whales, you know, the big black and white ones, the orcas, which was wonderful. And then off South Africa with great white sharks. We went diving with great white sharks. And there was a time when my producer, we were at the top of Table Mountain and decided that they wanted me to not abseil, but rap down the face of Table Mountain. Now, abseiling is, as you probably know, when you start at the top and you bounce your way down. But rapping is when you actually stand on the edge and look over, and then you run down at a 90-degree angle like that. And I remember he put me there, and he was going around saying to people, what should we do with Angela Rippon? Should we throw her off the mountain, or should we leave her? They threw me off the mountain. It was fascinating.
Now, I know that a difficult time in your life was TVAM.
Yes.
There was a sort of silver lining to that because you ended up for a year or so in America.
Yes, I did. I mean, TVAM was a complete and utter nightmare. But as a result of it, and the after effect of that was that there was an executive at the BBC. In those days, you weren't allowed to work for ITV and the BBC. Now, everybody kind of swaps and changes around, but it was restrictive practices at that time. And if you left the BBC to work for ITV, you were blackballed completely. And very famously, one of the executives at the BBC said, Angela Rippon will never work for the BBC again. Well, we proved him wrong, but it took a while. So for a year, I was completely out of work, with the exception of lovely Capital Radio, who said, no, we want you to come and work for us. And so I sat in for Michael Aspel when he went on holiday. I did the general election that year for them, and also the budget. But apart from that, I was completely blackballed by the BBC and really thought it was the end of my career. And I got a call one day from my agent, who at the time was Mark McCormack, and he said, how'd you like to come and work in America? And I said, I don't mind, who will employ me? And he said, well, CBS are interested in you coming and working in America as the arts and entertainment editor for Channel 7 in Boston. So I went to America and I worked for them for a year, which was wonderful. And because American television has, I'd worked for the BBC, apart from the 3 years when I worked at Westwood Television, I'd worked for the BBC for the whole of the rest of my career up until that point. And this was in 1984. So when I went to America, it was very interesting to find they had breakfast television, evening, all of that kind of thing was very new in America. It was not new in America then as it was here. Everyone had been doing it for a long time, and it was much more relaxed than a lot of the television that I'd been doing here in Britain. And I suppose the great thing that came out of it, apart from the fact that I won an Emmy for one of my documentaries and got nominated for others, I suddenly discovered that actually I could do my job, talking to my dad, but in a much more relaxed way. And I came back after a year for a variety of reasons. And I thought, well, that's it. I'm never going to get any work because they've said I'm never going to work for them again. And Frank Boff rang me and said, here, you're back. He said, do you want to come and do the papers on breakfast? I said, fine, if you like. I rocked up, did the papers, and 2 days after that, got a call from someone else at the BBC who said, we're just about to do a new quiz program called Master Team. It's the team version of Mastermind. We'd like you to present it. And I've been working for them again ever since. But what was great was I did come back with that feeling that I didn't have to be quite so sort of in a corset, so soft. You could be much more relaxed. And I suppose the thing that came out of all of that horror was that I think I became marginally a better broadcaster.
Well, did you ever experience sexism or ageism in the BBC?
Not really.
John Burt?
Oh, John Burt, famously. Yes, of course I did, yes. Well, I don't sort of think about that too much. Yes, when I think I was 51 at the time, and I was having trouble with one of the senior executives at the BBC who was taking me off a lot of programmes, and I knew John Burt reasonably well, and he was the Director General at the time. So I rang him up and said, I want to come and see you. And I went to see him and said, look, I've got this problem. I'm being taken off programmes for no better reason than whatever it was at the time. And John Burt said to me, well, Angela, he said, you have to accept that you've had your day and it's time for you to make way for the younger women who are coming up behind you. And I was so shocked. In my head, I was saying, is he having this conversation with Michael Parkinson, who's older than me, and Terry Wogan, who's older than me? And I was going through all the men who were older than me. And clearly, of course, he wasn't. But, as it's worked out, I'm now 77 and I'm still making television, and I'm not quite sure what John Burt is doing.
I think he's past his sell-by day, unlike you.
Well, he went to the Lords, of course. He went to the Lords to do blue sky thinking, I think, for the Prime Minister. But no, anyway, I'm still there.
One of the things we were talking about before is when you're the front person of a programme, I love Emily Maitlis on Newsnight, for example.
Yes.
What you don't realise when you're watching you or Emily or any of the others, Sophie Rayworth or whatever, is that there's a huge team of people behind, the cameraman, etc., and all the people who've been gathering the news, working away. I mean, any thoughts about how you deal with the people who I guess would be be regarded as working under you, but any tips for doctors who also work in teams?
I think that television it's a collaborative industry. It has to be. And I think in the past, there are people who have thought of themselves as being a legend in their own lunchtime, but to be absolutely honest, you may be the front person, whether it's reading the news, presenting a program, whatever that program is. You are only the tip of an iceberg, because the only thing that supports you is that team that works underneath you. And that team will be your producers, your directors, your researchers, your sound people, your camera people, the entire team that it takes to put a television program together, whether it's a studio program and radio, again, whether you're in the studio or whether you're out on the road filming. I can't do the job I do on my own. I can't. I have to have a cameraman and a sound recorder if I'm doing an interview with someone. If I'm in a studio, I have to have an array of lights, lighting engineers, sound engineers, all of the makeup, all of these people. And yes, the program that I've been doing for 14 years for the BBC called Rip Off Britain, which is a consumer program, we have an amazing team of researchers who go through every letter, email and phone call that comes into us, telling us about individual people, members of the public who have been ripped off or who feel that there is something, they've been knocking their heads against a brick wall because they can't get a solution or resolution to something, and they come to us. And those researchers go into all of that, and they recognize trends, in particular in new rip-offs or scams that are on the internet. They are the ones who say, look, this is a great story here, and then they start to do the research and they hand it to us, and then there's a producer or an editor or a director who then start to put all of those things together. And I present the program with Gloria Hunniford and Julia Somerville, and then the material comes to us. We work collaboratively as a team. When we go out and we film, because I'm a director, I can't resist saying to a cameraman, well, why don't we shoot it from over there or whatever? But we work collaboratively. We work as a team to get the best films that we can, the best interviews, the best information out of people, tell the story in the best way possible, so that when it goes on air, people will say, I didn't know that, I've learned something from that. People come up to us in the street and say, my God, you've saved us so much money by watching that program. We don't fall into those traps. But whatever the program is, television news similarly, you've got all your correspondents and your reporters out in the field, abroad, here in this country. You are a group of people working together. And it is really important that whatever your role within that team is, that you respect the expertise and the quality of work that your colleagues produce. Because it's no good going out on a film and I've got a cameraman who shoots everything out of focus. I need somebody who's really good, and therefore I have enormous respect for the camera people with whom I work, who turn out amazing films. It's no good going out if I'm rubbish and and the sound recorder is getting perfect sound and we're getting fabulous lighting, and then I'm rubbish. I'm letting down the team, and that's the only way to look at it.
And you're terribly nice with them and to them, I hear.
You have to be. Well, but again, it's important that you are, because one of the reasons I left Westwood Television to join television news all those years ago was because I was becoming more and more someone who was working as an executive, more behind the camera as an executive rather than in front of it. I've never had the ambitions up the greasy pole of the executive line of the BBC. I want to be a broadcaster and a communicator. That's where I get the joy out of what I do. And that's what I want to go on doing. But I work with many people, and have done over the years, who have been runners, researchers, whatever. A lot of researchers, a lot of sub-editors in television news, whatever. And if you don't respect them at that level, you have no idea where they're going to end up, because they do have ambitions up the greasy pole. And so someone who at the moment is in charge of all the commissioning for programs that go out on the BBC on daytime television. She was my assistant researcher when I was working back in the 1970s on a series of programs that were health programs on BBC One. People with whom I've worked in television news have gone on to be program controllers, to have set up their own companies where they're chief executives of independent film. And I still work with them. And it is important. You should never, never, never denigrate the work that's done by anybody in your team. Not only because that, it's like it's a chain. If you've got a weak link, the whole thing is going to fall to pieces. You need the strength in that chain, and you have to respect everybody within that chain. And if you haven't done that, when they're up there and you're still down there, you're going to be out of a job. But you can't make good television. You can't do anything properly, I don't think, if you haven't got a good working relationship with your team where everybody respects the quality of the work that everybody within that team does, because collectively that gives you the strength in that chain to produce quality programming. And it's not, and although the person who is front of house and on screen may be the one who gets the credit for it, it would not happen without all of those people behind you making sure that it works.
That's some good messages for trainee doctors who are aspiring consultants. Well, you mentioned Rip Off Britain, which we all love, but I better give a plug because we've got David Mason in the back there, and I think you and he worked on Antiques Roadshow.
Oh, we did.
In the early days. Any thoughts about that? What was it like working with David?
Dreadful. No, I tell you, it was wonderful. I tell you why, and David, because I presented the Antiques Roadshow. I was the first, I think, They did it one season with two people doing it. It didn't quite work, and then they asked me to do it. So I was really kind of like the first presenter on the Antiques Roadshow, and I think I did it for about 4 years, something like that. And David was the expert on paintings, and David personifies all of those other experts on the program then and indeed now. In the joy for me for doing the program was watching them at work, because there was nothing better than sitting at one of the tables where people would come with their precious things wrapped in newspapers or in the boot of their car or in a basket or whatever, and sit down with someone like David, who is has this amazing brain and amazing knowledge and expertise when it comes to fine art, and watching them at work, whether it was David with the paintings or Hugo Morley-Fletcher with the porcelain and the guy who was the clockmaster. It was wonderful. I would sit for ages, not when I wasn't interviewing or doing links or whatever, and just watch these guys at work. And it was an absolute joy because they were so and still are, in David's case, so knowledgeable. And you learnt so much. And I always think if you watch someone doing something well, it's just a wonderful experience to see it, whatever that is that they're doing, whether they're throwing a pot or making a dress or making a cake or whatever they're doing, the fact that they're doing it well. And that was the joy for me working on that program. Working with Arthur Negus was another story altogether, because anyway, but watching these guys at work was just absolutely wonderful. And do you remember, David, we had this woman who thought that she'd found a constable. She was convinced that the painting that she'd had in her family forever was an original constable. And I'm afraid you had to deliver the sad news, didn't you? But he taught me how to clean paintings with cotton wool and soap and what was the other thing? Turpentine. That's right. Cleaning it like this. We did, yes. No, it was a joy to work with.
Good plug for Mason McConnell in Bond Street.
In Bond Street.
That's the place to go.
The paintings are beautifully clean.
Let's talk about charity, because we've got one more clip to look at. You have, I know at the moment, you've got your CBE for support for dementia charities.
Yes.
But this is rich, famous, and in the slums.
Yes, I mean, because I got an OBE before that, fortunate for work with other charities. But this was part of Red Nose Day, and Comic Relief, who sent me, Samantha Janus, Reggie Yates, and Lenny Henry. They sent the four of us to the biggest slum in Africa, which is called Kibera in Kenya. And the idea was that we lived for a week, not with each other, but with a family or individual within the slum. So that and in fact, we had no contact with each other at all. We were all in different parts of this massive slum. There were millions there. And we had to live as if we were a slum dweller. They gave us the equivalent in money of £2.50 to last us for the week, which meant that we had to have a job. And Lenny went to work for the guy who used to haul the coal, Samantha, worked in a hospital where she had to slop out everything that was horrible in the operating room and in the gynecological wards. Reggie Yates had the worst job of all. He worked for the guy who emptied all the latrines. He earned more money than any of us, I have to tell you, and he deserved every penny of it. And I was sent to live in a house that was in a little lane that had an open sewer running down the middle of it. The lane was, you could actually stand and touch the houses on either side. So we're talking about a lane about so big with an open sewer down the middle. And this was the street where the prostitutes all lived. And I was given as my mentor a lady who called Juliana, who had 3 sons. She and her husband had a small business in Kibera selling clothes, but when they had the terrible riots there in the 1970s, he was macheted to death in front of her and her 3 small boys. She was raped and everything that they had was stolen from them. And the only way as a woman on her own in that environment to earn a living was on her back. But she was also a washerwoman, and she was my mentor. And she rocked up on the first day and said, come on, I'm taking you to work. And I had to work as a washerwoman. And this will show you what happened when we did it. It was explained either before or after. It was cold water and it was carbolic soap. And so that's what we were using. And literally, we were just doing that. And you didn't really see it very well in that clip, but I literally took the skin off my knuckles here, and where I was doing that, my nails had dug into here. And so the following day, I mean, they were bleeding, and the following day I had to have my hands dressed by the nurse, and the following day I couldn't go and be a washerwoman. And when I saw Juliana in the morning, it was so funny. She stood at a door and I said, Juliana, I can't come with you today. Look at my hands. And they were in just such a terrible state. And she stood, I had to stand up to do it. And she said, oh, don't worry, Mama. You can earn your living like this. And I said, I don't think so. So what I did instead, it was 5:30 in the morning, and because everybody gets up at 5 o'clock in there. And I thought, well, the only thing, I'm a white woman, I'm now, because we literally earned £1.60, so she had half and I had half, and then I gave her half of my half because she had 3 boys. So I was left with, I think, about 3 shillings or 4 shillings to live on for the rest of the week. And I thought, well, I've got to go and earn a living. And I knew that all the children go to school every day, and they all have school uniforms. Their parents, honestly, what they do to ensure that those kids get an education is amazing. And so I thought, at 5:30 in the morning, the whole of Kibera is built around a railway line, and that the railway line has a railway coming through it, but they use it like a highway. It's like a motorway. So at 5:30 in the morning, I thought, well, I'll follow a group of children wearing a particular school uniform, see where they go. And I rocked up at a school and said to the headmaster, would you give me a job? Because I thought, what am I going to do? I can't, white woman in the middle of a slum like that, where everybody is grafting for every penny they can get. Why are they going to give me a job? But I can teach English. So I went I followed these children, and I saw the headmaster and said, look, I'm here and I'm living here for a week. Would you please give me a job teaching? And he said, are you a teacher? I said, no, I'm a journalist. And he said, and he sort of looked at me and said, and then I had flashed, but I am a visiting professor of journalism at a British university. Oh, that's all right then, he said, so you can come. So I spent a glorious day with a classroom of children. There were 20 of them, and they were between 12 and 14. I spent the day teaching them English, and I had the most wonderful experience with those children. I get quite emotional thinking about it now, because I've kept in touch with the school. They were like sponges. They were so keen to learn, because every one of those kids knew that an education was their passport out of that slum. And I did a very simple, I thought, well, I'm not a teacher, so I've got to make this up as I go along. And I said, well, tell me all what you all want to do. So I got each of them to explain what they wanted to do. And there were kids in this slum school where it was an earthen floor and we were corrugated walls and roof. And they were sitting just on wooden benches. And one wanted to be a professional footballer, of course. But they wanted to be doctors. They wanted to be teachers. One boy wanted to be a pilot. One girl just wanted to be a professional singer, and I actually got her to sing to the class. But when they were talking about what they wanted to do, and they were talking about it, and they hit a brick wall because they didn't have the right word, I would give them the word and write it up on the board, or explain something about what they wanted to do using a word that perhaps was unfamiliar to them. And then at the end of it, and the girl who was singing, the whole class sort of started to sing. But then, as an exercise at the end of the morning class, I said, I now want you all just to write just one page of something using all the words that are up on the blackboard. See how many of them you can incorporate in what you're doing, which they did. And then I went around to correct them. And as I went from one child to another, each of the other 19 in the class got up and came leaning over with their notebooks, making notes of what I was saying. Their thirst for knowledge was just amazing. And I kept thinking, I just wish every child in a school in Britain could see how important education is to these children. They wanted to grasp everything I could give them. And one little girl, she brought me to tears because she wrote, today I have done, and I'm going to have to paraphrase, today I have done something I have never done in my life before. I have been taught by a white woman, and I will carry this memory with me to when I meet my ancestors. And I was so moved by that. And I've sort of kept in touch with the school, and I went back again 2 years later to visit my family, Juliana and her 3 boys, and to visit the school, and I got a company in Britain who are stationers, and they have a lot of sort of excess stuff to provide pencils and notebooks and things for them. And I took with me 2 young people's encyclopedias. And in the class, by now my class was a bit older, they were 16 by now. And I said to them, all right, what we're going to do is you're going to open the encyclopedia at any page, you're going to put your finger in a word, and we're going to talk about whatever that is. And we ended up doing Archimedes' principle, because they were talking about, one of the kids put their finger in the map of Greece, didn't know where Greece was, so I ended up drawing a map of the world to show them where Greece was. And it was just absolutely wonderful. And I think of many of the things that I've done, that is one of the things that will stay with me forever, that wonderful experience of going and teaching those kids and just getting that feeling from them, how important education is to them and what every one of them wanted out of their lives.
We're running out of time, so we better show a very last clip, very famous clip.
Well, I'll tell you what, it is a bit famous, but it goes on forever. So if anybody's got any questions,
why don't we ask,
if anybody's got any questions for me, and I can answer some questions, and then when this other thing starts, we can all leave the room.
All right. So anybody in the audience would like to ask Angela a question? A more intelligent question than mine, probably?
Yes.
Sir?
Yes, for doctors, sort of work-life balance is a very important sort of area. Do you have any tips on that sort of from your world, broadcasting, journalism?
Only to find something that really is a release from what you do if you want to get that work-life balance. Years ago, I hosted a conference in Dallas, where they had all the top lawyers from an international company brought together. And they had someone who was talking about work-life balance. And what was interesting was that it was a room that held something like 600 people, and but there were only about 500 seats. Every seat was taken, and then there were people sitting on the stairs and everywhere because they wanted to hear what this man was saying. And because they were all, on the greasy pole, they were going to become partners, and they were going to earn so much, and they had to do so many hours, and they earned, $500,000 a year or whatever. They were all very, very well paid international lawyers. And this guy was so well known in America that they all wanted to come and hear what he had to say. And I remember one of the things he said was, just think doesn't matter how high you rise in the company, there will come a day when you walk a stranger down the aisle and hand her over to someone else, meaning you've never seen your daughter grow up, you've never done it. And his philosophy was to find something, yes, to get your work-life balance in balance. You have to be very strict with yourself and find something that will take you so out of what you do for your living that there is not an opportunity to even think about it. I play tennis, for instance, badly, but I play because you can't think about anything else about where the ball is going to go and where you're going to hit it. I used to do a lot of riding. I used to event, and I would be, I have a home down in the West Country, so I could ride across Dartmoor. I think the answer is, be strict with yourself, because you don't want to grow up and find that your family are strangers to you, or that your friends are strangers to you. Find something that you can do with them, preferably, so that it's inclusive. But if it's not, it's something that takes you away from what you do for a living, so that there is at least an hour in a day, or a half a day in a week, where you are not actually tied to what you do for a living and not being stressed by whatever comes with that job. But, as doctors, you have a different career to the one that I have. But I think all of us need what a friend of mine always refers to as me time. And that's what you need, I think. Make sure you get it.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Yes, a more frivolous one in a way. I just wondered if you had to choose between the alligators and Eric and Ernie, who haven't been mentioned yet, who would you pick?
Oh, Eric and Ernie were much more fun, and they didn't bite.
Which gives us...
Anybody else got a question about anything? Yes?
Yes, Jill.
Hello, fascinating stories. I wonder what you thought of the mobile phone, because it's turned all of us into amateur photographers,
Yes.
and, filmmakers, and social media and Twitter, the news. What impact has that had on you?
Massive. Well, technology in general has made such a difference to what we do. When I started in broadcasting, everything was black and white and it was film, and we edited film with a razor blade and glue. That was how we did it. Now, you go into an edit suite and it's like it's like the console of the Starship Enterprise. What you can now do is amazing. And the technology, of course, is so different. The very first tape recorder I had, that I would go out and do interviews with, was the size and weight of a car battery. It's why one of my shoulders is slightly lower than the other one. And so when they introduced a thing called a ewer, which was about so big, it was wonderful. But now, as you say, the mobile phone, if Rip Off Britain or any of the programs I work for suddenly say, and we've got to you've got to re-record one line because the lawyers have said we can't say that, I do it on my phone, and I then just send it through on my phone as an email, and it goes out on national television, just in perfect sound, just like, well, not quite like the sound that a qualified sound recordist will produce, but very, very good sound quality. I remember when the Afghan war was at its height, we were all amazed. We were amazed at the way that people could be sitting in the middle of the desert on a mobile phone or the equivalent, doing live broadcasting from the middle of the desert. And I was in the studio at Television News when we had the very first satellite pictures come through from America, and the time had to be booked, and we had a 4-minute window, and the pictures came across, and we were all terribly excited about it, and that was how we used to get material. And I went to Italy for Television News to cover the plebiscite that they had on divorce and abortion, and that was in the 70s, and the only way in those days to get our material back, because it was film, you couldn't do this now. Just think, we used to go to the airport, find which British Airways flight was going, find somebody in a British Airways uniform, it didn't matter whether it was the pilot or one of the stewards, and say, will you hand carry this film back to London for us, please? We'd then ring London, and say it's on the 6 o'clock flight from Turin or wherever, or Rome or wherever we were at the time. It'll be landing at whatever, and the BBC would send somebody on a motorbike to pick it up, take it back, develop it, and the next day it would be on the telly. Well, for a start, you can't get away with handing over stuff now to people in airports, but that was how we used to have to get all the material back. Now, I can be anywhere in the world on my phone, on FaceTime or whatever, sending a report live to wherever. And every one of you have become filmmakers. Every one of you. How many times, whenever you see on television news film which has got sort of black either side of it and the film is in the middle, that's an indication that it's not professional film. It's come from someone using their mobile phone. How many times now do you see that when you're on site, you're there, and the story is happening in front of you? And so you record it, and the next minute you know it's on world news. It has revolutionized everything that we do. The thing that I hate about modern media is the way in which trolls are able to use it, and I think that because it is such a wonderful tool for communication and information, but for it to have been taken over the way that it has by people who say the most horrendous things anonymously and get away with it. I hate that. I hate the way that it's being used on the dark web to steal people's identities and steal their money and all of the other horrible things that happen on the dark web. I hate the fact that there are more people watching pornography on our computers than there are looking up something on Wikipedia or Google or watching proper television. There's a side to it which I think is horrible, but I still feel that the way that things have progressed over the years, since I started when everything was black and white and it was all hand carried, my goodness, it has revolutionized the job that we do. And the great thing that it does is it can take us at times like now, when there is a war in Ukraine, it can take us to the heart of the story, and we can see, as the people of Russia cannot because of their state-controlled media, we can see what is happening. We can be there. And the brilliant reporters and correspondents that we have and that other stations around the world have, they take us into those stories. They bring it to us immediately. And that's the wonderful thing, I think, about technology. And I just wish that could swamp out all the bad, but it's going to be with us forever, and we just have to learn how to live with it, I'm afraid. But I think in general, I feel that the amazing advancements that have been made in technology have revolutionized the way that we are able to bring you the news and the way that you are able to see the news, and not just the news. I was watching the most wonderful documentary last weekend that David Attenborough was doing, showing what happened to the dinosaurs when meteorite or whatever it was hit the earth, and in 30 seconds how the world was changed. And computer graphics brought all of that to life. All of that, I think, is absolutely wonderful, and I think we're living in quite an extraordinary age. And sometimes you wish that it was not quite so immediate, but on the whole, I'm glad that it is. And in your profession, my goodness, look at the advancements that have been made technically in the way that all of you work. How, I was reading some stuff the other day about the surgeons, because I was doing a story about how some of the first surgeons to realize that you didn't have to amputate a broken leg, you could actually, you could mend it, were the naval doctors working in Napoleon's navy, and they were among the first to recognize that that was what you could do, then that it would work. And when you think of all the primitive things that were being done 300 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and the rate of improvement in technology and knowledge has been such that now, look at what you are able to do and the things that you have at your fingertips, technically, that make such a difference to the way that you are able to help patients.
We better stop here.
We had better, because
let's just show the last clip.
But we can all go. Yes, you don't have to.
But let's watch the first bit, because this is the reference already made. Thanks, Ben. Legend is the word for this lady. And what a career, what a life. And thank you so much.
Pleasure.
For supporting us, and thank you for the questions. Thank you for coming. Supper, for those who are staying for supper, is now going to be in the Wimpole room. So we've got a chance there to answer Angela a few more questions, maybe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.